Following his victory in the disastrous mercenary war, Hannibal Barca set off for Spain. There he built a Spanish empire, conquering new territories and subjugating the local population. Hannibal died suddenly in 228 BC, and he was succeeded by his son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair. Hasdrubal would go on to consolidate his power in Iberia and even expand the Carthaginian holding far inland. During his reign in 225 BC, an embassy from Rome arrived in Iberia. The Romans, who were in danger of attack from the Celts, wanted to put a check on Carthaginian expansions. The two sides agreed that River Ebro would mark the boundary between the respective spheres of influence. A more logical choice for the boundary would have been the Pyrenees mountain range to the north, which separates the Iberian Peninsula from the rest of Europe. Instead, the Ebro River was chosen because the Romans were allied with the Greek colony Emporion situated in northern Iberia. With both sides happy with this arrangement, they returned to their business. Only a few years later, in 221 BC, Hasdrubal II died abruptly, and he was succeeded by Hamilcar's son, Hannibal Barca. Shortly into his reign, all tribes south of Ebro came under Punic influence, all except for one. The city of Saguntum had a friendly relationship with Rome. They would periodically send messages to Rome to inform them about Carthaginian activities in Iberia. These messages and the Saguntines were mostly ignored, but now that the Carthaginians expanded all the way to the Ebro, the Romans took notice. In 220 BC, the Romans sent envoys to Hannibal, but they first stopped in Saguntum. The leading men in the city were divided, some of them wanting to join Carthage, while others preferred Rome. The Roman envoys were called in to mediate between the two sides. In clear breach of the Ebro Treaty, the Romans executed the nobles on the Carthaginian side, and Saguntum allied itself with Rome. The Roman envoys then continued on their way and met up with Hannibal in Carthago Nova. Hannibal was well aware of past Roman interferences in Carthaginian affairs and knew what to expect. The envoys, rather than negotiating with the young general, chose a more stern approach. They warned Hannibal not to interfere with Saguntum and to abide by the Ebro Treaty. The Romans weren't trying to provoke war with these requests. Their slow reaction when the war does start is evidence enough. Instead, they only wanted to ensure the obedience of another Barca general. This backfired spectacularly, and Hannibal, who had no prior plans to attack Saguntum, informed the envoys that he would in fact take the city and absorb it into the Carthaginian Empire. He deliberately refused to mention Ebro, strongly implying that he had no intentions of respecting the old treaty. Disheartened, the envoys traveled to Carthage to plead with the Senate, but there too they received unsatisfactory answers. Having failed their mission, the envoys returned to Rome and informed the Senate about an imminent attack on Saguntum. Hannibal now asked permission from Carthage to attack the city. The Barcas never before asked permission to wage war in Spain, and the implication was clear. Was Hannibal allowed to risk another war with Rome? He was given a free hand by the authorities in Carthage. These messages were exchanged during the autumn of 220 BC. All necessary preparations were then made during the winter, and Hannibal marched on Saguntum in the spring of 219. Saguntum was a small, well-fortified city positioned on a hilltop. Hannibal hoped to take it quickly before the Romans had a chance to react. This was futile, however, and the Saguntines would hold out for 8 long months. This protracted siege exposed one of Hannibal's weaknesses. Usually a brilliant general, he had trouble taking even small, ally-less towns. This factor may have played a role in his later decision not to siege Rome after the Battle of Cannae. If Livy is to be trusted, Hannibal was wounded by a spear early on in the siege. He was later forced to transfer the siege to his officer Masherbal in order to deal with an uprising of the Aretani and Carpetani. These events just illustrate the precarious position Hannibal found himself in. Eventually, with no Roman help in sight, Saguntum had finally fallen. Part of the wall was breached by battering rams, and the Carthaginians rushed in. Some desperate Saguntines, fearing a fate worse than death, destroyed as many of their possessions as they could before killing themselves and their families. The town was plundered and the population enslaved. Hannibal could now only return to his winter quarters and wait for the Roman response in the spring. Back when the siege started, a message was sent to Rome, but the Romans did nothing, one way or the other. A heated debate arose in the Senate. On one side, a former consul, Lucius Cornelius Lentulus, advocated for a swift military response. On the other side, an unknown member of the Fabii family called for caution. The Roman senators, who usually decided such important matters by consensus, found themselves in a deadlock. Neither side could prevail, and the debates continued throughout the year. It should be noted here that both Roman consuls were currently in Illyria, and recalling one of them to send help to Saguntum would take some time. It was only when Saguntum had fallen that the senators finally agreed, but they would have to wait for spring to send envoys. On the other side of the Mediterranean, Hannibal didn't waste any time. While awaiting messengers from Rome, he was already making preparations for the upcoming conflict. First, he sent 16,000 Spanish troops to Africa and 15,000 African troops to Spain. He believed this would strengthen the bond between the two regions. He appointed his brother Hasdrubal as his deputy, making him second in command. Lastly, he sent spies into southern Gaul and northern Italy. Their task was to sow discontent and prepare the locals for the passage of Hannibal's army. Even from the very beginning, Hannibal had one plan: to invade Italy from the north across the Alps. If he stayed in Spain, he could easily defeat any Roman general, but the lessons learned in the First Punic War were at the forefront of his mind. The Romans had an inexhaustible pool of men, and all losses suffered far from home were easily replaceable. A string of heavy defeats in Spain was unlikely to convince the Romans to surrender. On the other hand, there was a real threat of an African invasion. There was no need to defeat Hannibal when they could simply take Carthage and force them to make peace. This left only one option: to invade Italy and attack Rome directly. The web of alliances holding the Roman state wasn't impervious. The bitter Third Samnite War was still within living memory, and so was the conquest of Magna Graecia. Not to mention Cisalpine Gaul, conquered only a couple of years ago. Hannibal believed that quick victories on the field would turn Rome's own allies against them. When spring of 218 BCE finally rolled around, the Romans sent a delegation to Carthage. The delegation was stacked with former consuls, 5 in total, including both consuls of the previous year, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Marcus Livius Salinator. The head of this delegation was Quintus Fabius Maximus. These 3 men will all have important roles to play in the upcoming conflict. The Romans demanded that Hannibal be handed over if he was acting of his own accord. Conversely, the Romans were instructed to declare war. Carthaginians had no intention of handing over Hannibal, and one of the senators pointed out that Saguntum was south of the Ebro and wasn't a part of any treaty. Furthermore, they pointed out the illegal takeover of Sardinia some years ago. At a loss for any coherent arguments, Fabius grabbed his toga and proclaimed, "Gentlemen, I hold in the folds of my toga both peace and war. Which should I let drop?" The Carthaginian suffet said only, "Whichever you prefer." Letting his toga fall, Fabius simply answered, "I give you war." The senators unanimously erupted into a deafening shout, "We accept it!" And so the two nations were once more at war with each other. In the past, historians were quick to blame the Barca family for the outbreak of the Second Punic War. They even go as far as saying that Hamilcar devised the plan to invade Italy from the north, and that his campaigns in Iberia were meant to facilitate that plan. However, more recently, historians shied away from the great man history and looked at other broader factors for the outbreak of the war. The Spanish campaign was simply a means for the Carthaginians to rebound from the heavy losses sustained during the First Punic War. Waging a new war with Rome would require great naval strength, but the state of the Carthaginian navy in 219 is a clear sign that the Barcids weren't planning on a direct confrontation with Rome so soon. Roman interference in Iberia certainly provoked the Carthaginian response, but it cannot be claimed with certainty that either side premeditated this war. Whatever the case may be, war was upon them, and the two great powers of the Western Mediterranean were embarking on yet another lengthy conflict that would cost countless lives. In 218 BC, Publius Cornelius Scipio and Tiberius Sempronius Longus were elected consuls. 6 Roman legions were raised, with as many Latin alii. Each legion consisted of 4,200 infantry and 300 cavalry. The alii had more troops than usual, owing to a greater perceived threat from the Carthaginians. Scipio was assigned 2 legions along with 14,000 allied infantry and 1,600 cavalry. He was sent to Spain to deal with Hannibal directly. His colleague Sempronius was also assigned 2 legions with 16,000 allied infantry and 1,800 cavalry. He was sent to Sicily in order to invade Carthage itself. The remaining 2 legions, along with 10,000 allied infantry and 1,000 cavalry, were placed under the command of a praetor Lucius Manlius Vulso. He was sent to Cisalpine Gaul to deal with the rebelling Gauls. In addition to these troops, Sempronius was assigned 160 quinqueremes, while Scipio got the remaining 60. All told, the Romans had around 71,000 troops in early 218 BCE. On the other side, Hannibal had 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 58 elephants in total. Of these, only 26,000 would cross the Alps. Hasdrubal was given 15,000 troops and 21 elephants to hold Spain. He was also given 50 or so quinqueremes they had in Iberia. With the rest of the troops, numbering 87,000, Hannibal would march out of Carthago Nova. For all his preparations during the winter, Hannibal was slow to act in the spring. War was declared in March. Hannibal got the news in early April, but he only moved in late May. After crossing the Ebro, Hannibal spent valuable time and resources fighting obscure Iberian tribes. He made no moves against the Greek colony Emporion, a Roman ally and a starting point for a future Spanish campaign. 7,000 troops died in the fighting and 10,000 Celtiberians returned home. An army of 11,000 was left to guard this new territory, leaving Hannibal with around 59,000 troops. By now it was already early September and the winter was fast approaching. These unnecessary delays, more than anything else, puzzled historians. But if we look more broadly, they can be easily explained. If the Romans learned of his plan to invade Italy, they could simply wait for him on the other side and crush his exhausted army. To avoid this, Hannibal's movements had to be perfectly timed. After learning that Scipio started marching north and Sempronius south, Hannibal set off from Carthago Nova. An unexpected rebellion in Cisalpine Gaul, sparked by Hannibal's own agents, delayed Scipio until late August. During this time, Hannibal busied himself in northern Iberia. When Scipio finally started moving again, so did Hannibal. After realizing that he would have to face only one consular army, he could afford to leave 20,000 men behind. As we have already mentioned, the Gauls, or more precisely the Boii and Insubres, rebelled. Manlius Vulso was sent to deal with this threat, but he was ambushed while marching north and had to retreat to a fortified position. Scipio, who was in Pisa making preparations to sail to Spain, had to postpone his departure. Part of his force, 1 legion and 5,000 allies, was diverted to aid Vulso. Scipio had to raise fresh troops, delaying his departure until late August. When he was once again finally ready, he sailed from Pisa along the French coast and toward Spain. In the meantime, Sempronius reached Lilybaeum and started making preparations for the invasion of Africa. Hannibal crossed the Pyrenees with 50,000 infantry and 9,000 cavalry. From there, he continued his march along the coast. The Carthaginians sent gifts to the local Gallic tribes, thus securing a safe passage across the southern Gaul. Hannibal, confident in his abilities, was more than happy to meet Scipio on the field. If he destroyed the Roman army now, he would not only secure Spain, but also weaken the Roman position in northern Italy. Once Hannibal reached the river Rhone, he marched his troops 4 days upstream, looking for a favorable crossing spot. The Gauls on the western side offered him assistance and helped him build rafts to ferry the troops across the river. Unfortunately, the Gauls on the eastern shore of the river were not inclined towards the Carthaginian army. They formed up along the river, preventing Hannibal from crossing. Hannibal sent a part of his force to march even further north in order to find another crossing spot. The men crossed the river and marched back south towards the Gallic army. In the early morning, they sent a signal to Hannibal, who started crossing with his men. The Gauls once again formed up to meet him, but when they were attacked from the north, they quickly relented and fled from the field. Hannibal could now direct the crossing of the rest of his force. The river was 60 meters wide and the Carthaginians had no large ships that could safely carry the elephants. They built a makeshift pontoon bridge and covered it with dirt. The movements of the water scared some animals and they jumped into the river. Eventually, all 37 elephants safely crossed to the other side. 38,000 infantry and 8,000 cavalry crossed the Rhone with Hannibal, a notable decrease considering only limited resistance in Gaul. By that time, Scipio reached Massalia, a Greek colony and Roman ally. There he got the news that the Carthaginians were crossing the river upstream. Scipio disembarked, and while making preparations for the march north, he sent a scouting party. Along the way, they intercepted the Carthaginian scouts and the two sides clashed. The Roman cavalry came out on top and they could safely observe Hannibal's camp. After receiving this information, Scipio started marching north with only limited supplies. By the time he reached Hannibal's camp, the Carthaginians were long gone. Evidently, the Punic general had a change of heart. Winter was approaching and time was of the utmost essence. Instead of facing Scipio directly, Hannibal chose to march even further upstream and then towards the Alps. He was confident in Hasdrubal's ability to hold Spain against the Romans. Furthermore, Hannibal received a delegation of chieftains from Cisalpine Gaul. They assured him of Gallic assistance once he crossed into Italy. This was enough to convince him to continue his march without first dealing with Scipio. The Romans, on the other hand, unable to supply this large army so far from the coast, decided to return to Massalia. In this crucial moment, Scipio had to make an important decision that would impact the rest of the war. He sent his older brother, Scipio Calvus, along with the entirety of the army into Spain. He himself returned to Italy and started raising another army in preparation of Hannibal's invasion. During his march, Hannibal intervened in a struggle for kingship over a Celtic tribe. This endeared him to the new king Berneus, and the Celts supplied the Punic army with both food and warm clothes needed for crossing the Alps. Continuing on their way, the Carthaginians now reached the territory of the Allobrogis. These were hostile people, but they refrained from attacking the Carthaginians, while Berneus and his men were shadowing them. Hannibal finally reached the foot of the Alps and started his long and perilous ascent. Berneus didn't follow them up the mountain, and the Allobrogis started harassing the Carthaginian column. The journey up the mountain was hard as it was, but frequent raids put a further strain on the army. Luckily, the rear guard, made up of heavy African troops, held their ground against any larger attacks. Finally, after 9 long days, Hannibal reached the summit of the pass. The location of this pass is still hotly debated, and we will probably never know the true path Hannibal took over the Alps. The attack now stopped, and the Carthaginians faced another, even fiercer enemy, the elements. It was mid-November by now, and fresh snow was already starting to build up along the path. With the morale of the army at a low point, Hannibal gave a rousing speech. He pointed towards the rich and fertile plains of northern Italy, assuring his men of great riches awaiting them on the other side. The journey down was even more perilous. Numerous obstacles blocked their path, but eventually, utterly exhausted, the army reached flat ground. Out of the 87,000 troops Hannibal had left Carthago Nova with, only 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry reached Italy. Miraculously, around 30 elephants crossed the mountains successfully. During a long march across unfriendly territory, desertions were all too common. The fresh recruits were the first to go, leaving Hannibal with mostly seasoned troops, veterans of numerous Spanish campaigns. These veterans and a high number of cavalry would play crucial roles in the upcoming battles. The delay Scipio made while preparing to cross into Spain bought enough time for Hannibal's army to thin out. These delays did more to weaken Hannibal's position in Italy than Scipio's military campaigns ever could. A Herculean effort was needed to cross the Alps, but it only brought Hannibal close to his enemy. Roman forces were mustering in the north, and Hannibal's greatest challenge was yet to come. Join us next time as we discuss the first Roman disaster, the Battle of the Trebia River. The attack now stopped, and the Carthaginians faced another, even fiercer enemy, the elephants.